You think you're a princess? Let's see if you're Cinderella." Those words echoed through the elegant living room as Griffin's cruel laughter followed the arc of Sloane's beige high heels sailing through the open window. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as every conversation in the room halted, all eyes turning to witness her shame. How had her life come to this moment? Standing barefoot and humiliated at her husband's boss's mansion, fighting back tears that threatened to spill down her carefully made-up face. Sloane Caldwell had once been a confident young woman, with dreams as bright as her smile. At 27, she should have been living her best life. Instead, she stood frozen, her toes curling against the cold marble floor, wishing she could disappear. The silence in the room was deafening until someone coughed awkwardly, and the murmur of conversations slowly resumed, though she could feel the weight of pitying glances. "Griffin, that's enough," came a firm voice from behind her. Asher Thornton, Griffin's boss and host of the evening's corporate party, stepped forward. His expression was a careful mask of professional courtesy, but his eyes revealed a controlled anger as he looked at Griffin. "I think you've had too much to drink." Griffin's handsome face twisted into a sneer. "It was just a joke, Asher. My wife knows how to take a joke, don't you, honey?" His words were slurred, his sixth glass of whiskey dangling precariously from his fingertips. The Griffin that her colleagues and friends saw, charming, successful, the perfect husband, was a carefully constructed facade. This was the real Griffin, the one only she knew. "I'll go get your shoes, Mrs. Caldwell," Asher said quietly, ignoring Griffin completely as he headed toward the garden doors. "Don't bother," Griffin called after him. "She can get them herself. It's not like she does anything useful around here anyway." He laughed again, looking around for support from the other executives, but they all averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the display. Sloane stood rooted to the spot, her mind racing back to how different things had been just 3 years ago. She had been Sloane Matthews then, a dedicated first-grade teacher beloved by her students, living in her small but cozy house inherited from her grandmother. She'd met Griffin at a friend's wedding, where he'd been the most attentive man she'd ever encountered. His blue eyes had sparkled with interest as she spoke about her passion for teaching, and he'd called her impressive, something no man had ever said to her before. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of expensive restaurants, weekend getaways, and heartfelt declarations of love. Griffin had seemed too good to be true, handsome, successful, and seemingly devoted to her. When he proposed after just 6 months, she'd been caught up in the romance of it all. The warning signs had been there, his occasional controlling behavior, his subtle criticisms disguised as concern, the way he would withdraw affection when she disagreed with him, but she had dismissed them, attributing them to stress or miscommunication. Marriage had revealed the truth. The controlling behaviors intensified, the criticism became constant, and his charming mask slipped more frequently at home. By the time she realized the extent of his emotional abuse, she was already pregnant with Finn. She had considered leaving many times, but Griffin had convinced her that she couldn't make it on her own, that she needed him. And now there was Finn to consider, her sweet baby boy with his father's blue eyes, but, thankfully, her gentle disposition. "Here you are." Asher's voice pulled her from her thoughts as he returned with her shoes. Unlike Griffin, who stood a head taller than her 5'4" frame, Asher was only a few inches taller, with a lean build that suggested regular exercise rather than Griffin's gym-obsessed physique. He knelt down and placed the shoes carefully on the floor in front of her. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, for her ears only. The simple kindness nearly broke her. When was the last time someone had shown her basic human decency? She slipped her feet into the shoes, wincing slightly at the pinch of the pointed toes. "Thank you," she whispered, afraid that speaking any louder would cause her voice to crack. "Asher, man, are you serious right now?" Griffin's voice boomed across the room. "Playing servant to my wife? What's next? A glass slipper fitting? Should I be worried?" His attempt at humor fell flat, in the tense atmosphere. Asher stood, his expression hardening. "Griffin, I think it would be best if you left now." Griffin's face reddened with anger. "You're kicking me out? Do you know how much business I bring to this company?" "We can discuss your professional contributions on Monday," Asher replied evenly. "For now, I think you should call a cab." Griffin stalked over to Sloane, grabbing her arm with enough pressure to make her wince. "Come on, we're leaving," he hissed. Sloane looked down at his hand on her arm, then at her son, who was being watched by one of the servers in a makeshift nursery in the adjacent room. The young woman caught her eye and gave a small, understanding nod. In that moment, something inside Sloane shifted. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Griffin's grip tightened. "What did you say?" "I said no," she repeated, louder this time. "I'm staying with Finn. You can go." "You think you can embarrass me like this?" Griffin's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "After everything I've done for you? You were nothing when I met you, Sloane. Nothing." The words cut deep, as they were designed to do. But instead of shrinking as she usually did, Sloane straightened her spine. "Let go of my arm, Griffin." For a moment, she thought he might refuse, might make a scene even worse than the one with her shoes. But awareness of his surroundings seemed to penetrate his anger, and he released her with a small shove. "Fine," he spat. "Stay here. See if I care. Maybe I'll find someone who actually appreciates what a real man looks like." He turned and stormed toward the door, pausing only to grab his coat from a startled server. The door slammed behind him, and Sloane released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her arm throbbed where he had gripped it, and she knew it would bruise by morning. Another mark to hide under long sleeves, another excuse to make up if anyone noticed. Asher approached her cautiously, as one might a wounded animal. "Are you all right, Mrs. Caldwell?" "Sloane, please," she said, feeling suddenly exhausted. "And no, I'm not all right, but I will be." She glanced toward the room where Finn was. "I should check on my son." "Of course," Asher nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. In the quiet nursery room, the young server smiled apologetically. "He's been an angel," she said, handing over the sleeping one-year-old. "Just fell asleep about 10 minutes ago." Sloane cradled Finn against her chest, breathing in his baby scent, finding comfort in his warm weight. "Thank you for watching him," she murmured. "It was my pleasure, ma'am." Alone with her son, Sloane let a few tears escape. What was she going to do now? Griffin wouldn't forgive this defiance easily. Going home tonight would mean facing his rage, possibly worse than ever before. But where else could she go? She had distanced herself from most of her friends during her marriage, another of Griffin's subtle manipulations. Her parents lived 3 states away, and she couldn't afford a hotel room. Griffin controlled all their finances, giving her only a small allowance for personal expenses. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Asher stood there, his expression concerned. "The party's winding down," he said. "Can I call someone for you? Family, perhaps?" Sloane shook her head, embarrassment flooding her again. "I'll be fine. I'll just..." "Just what? Go home to Griffin? Sleep in her car with a baby?" Asher seemed to read her thoughts. "I don't think going home is a good idea tonight," he said carefully. "I have a guest house on the property. You and your son are welcome to stay there. No strings attached," he added hastily, as if anticipating her concern. "Just a safe place for tonight." Sloane hesitated. She barely knew this man, her husband's boss, but there was something in his eyes, a kindness, an understanding, that made her trust him more than she probably should. "I can't impose like that," she began. "It's not an imposition," he assured her. "The house is just sitting there empty, and I'd feel better knowing you're safe. Please," he added, when she still looked uncertain. Before she could answer, the sound of raised voices came from the main room. Sloane tensed, recognizing Griffin's angry tone. Had he come back? With Finn in her arms, she moved cautiously toward the door, peering out into the main room. Griffin had indeed returned, but he wasn't alone. A tall, slim woman with platinum blonde hair stood beside him, her arm possessively linked through his. Sloane recognized her immediately. Brielle Winters, Griffin's co-worker from the marketing department. The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. The late nights at the office, the business trips that seemed to multiply, the scent of unfamiliar perfume that sometimes clung to his clothes. "Griffin, this is completely inappropriate," Asher was saying, his professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal genuine anger. "I asked you to leave." Griffin laughed, the sound ugly and slurred. "Just wanted to show everyone who the real man is, boss." "Sloane thinks she can humiliate me? Watch this." He pulled Brielle closer, kissing her deeply, as several remaining guests gasped or looked away in embarrassment. When they broke apart, Brielle giggled, seemingly enjoying the drama. "Sorry about your wife, Mr. Thornton," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "But Griffin and I have had something special for months now. She just doesn't make him happy anymore." Sloane felt as if she'd been slapped. Months? While she'd been up night after night with their colicky newborn, Griffin had been with this woman? While she'd been trying desperately to be the perfect wife, to avoid his anger, to make their marriage work for Finn's sake, he'd been laughing behind her back? Asher's voice was ice-cold when he spoke again. "Both of you, out, now! And Griffin, don't bother coming in on Monday. You're fired." Griffin's smirk faltered. "You can't fire me. I'm your top sales executive." "I can, and I just did," Asher replied evenly. "No amount of sales justifies this behavior. Collect your things on Monday morning. Security will escort you." Griffin's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this, Thornton. Your precious company won't last 6 months without me." He pointed at Sloane, who was still standing in the doorway with Finn. "This is your fault, you frigid bitch. Was this your plan all along? Sleep with the boss to get me fired?" Sloane flinched at the accusation, but Asher stepped between them. "That's enough, Griffin. Leave now, or I call the police." For a moment, Griffin looked like he might physically attack Asher, but Brielle tugged on his arm. "Come on, baby. Let's go to my place. They're not worth it." With a final venomous glare, Griffin allowed himself to be led out. The remaining guests began to disperse quickly, murmuring awkward goodbyes to Asher, avoiding Sloane's eyes. Within minutes, only the catering staff remained, quietly cleaning up. Sloane stood frozen, her world collapsing around her. Everything she had endured, all the compromises she had made for the sake of her marriage, for Finn's future, it had all been for nothing. Griffin had been cheating on her, humiliating her not just privately, but now publicly as well. "The guest house offer still stands," Asher said quietly, approaching her again. "In fact, I insist. You shouldn't be alone tonight." This time Sloane nodded, too numb to argue. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do you need anything from your house? I can send my security to get it." Sloane thought of the diaper bag she'd brought, thankfully stocked with enough supplies for overnight. "No, we have what we need for tonight. Tomorrow would be another matter." But she couldn't think that far ahead right now. "Let me show you to the guest house, then," Asher said, gently guiding her toward the back of the mansion. As they walked through the beautifully landscaped garden, Sloane realized that the path of her life had just irrevocably changed. The marriage she had been desperately trying to save was over, had been over long before tonight's humiliation. The future stretched before her, terrifying in its uncertainty, but also, possibly, offering a freedom she had forgotten how to imagine. The guest house was a charming cottage with a small porch, set back from the main house and surrounded by flowering bushes. Inside, it was warmly furnished with a living area, kitchenette, bathroom, and bedroom. "Make yourself comfortable," Asher said, standing awkwardly at the door. "There are fresh towels in the bathroom and some basics in the fridge. If you need anything else, just call the main house. The number is by the phone." "Thank you," Sloane said again, feeling like the words were inadequate for what he was doing for her. "Try to get some rest," he replied with a small smile. "Things often look clearer in the morning." He hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth." You deserve better than what happened tonight. Much better." With that, he left, closing the door softly behind him. Sloane stood in the middle of the unfamiliar room, her sleeping son heavy in her arms, and let the tears come freely at last. The morning sunlight filtered through unfamiliar curtains, momentarily disorienting Sloane as she blinked awake. Finn's soft babbling from the makeshift crib, a drawer from the dresser padded with blankets, brought reality crashing back. Last night, the shoes, Griffin's public humiliation, and even more public betrayal, the revelation of his affair with Brielle, and now, waking up in Asher Thornton's guest house, her life in shambles around her. "Mama!" Finn called, pulling himself up to stand in his improvised bed, his chubby face breaking into a delighted smile at seeing her awake. At least her son still looked at her with love, untainted by the ugliness of adult complications. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, forcing brightness into her voice as she scooped him up. His diaper was soaked, and she was grateful she'd packed extra supplies in the bag. As she changed him on the bed, her mind raced through her options, none of them particularly appealing. She could go home and face Griffin, try to work things out for Finn's sake. The thought made her stomach clench. Or she could call her parents in Arizona, admit that her perfect marriage was a sham, and ask to move back in with them. The humiliation of that option was almost as bad as returning to Griffin. There was her grandmother's house. Her house, technically, though she'd let Griffin convince her to rent it out when they got married. The current lease wasn't up for 3 more months. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Sloane froze, irrationally afraid it might be Griffin, before remembering where she was. Balancing Finn on her hip, she cautiously approached the door. "Who is it?" she called, her voice shakier than she intended. "It's Asher. I've brought breakfast, if you're hungry." Sloane glanced down at herself, still wearing last night's now wrinkled cocktail dress, her makeup smudged from crying herself to sleep. She hadn't even brushed her teeth, but her stomach rumbled at the mention of food. When had she last eaten? The canapes she'd barely touched at the party? "Just a minute," she called, quickly rummaging through her purse for a hair tie. She pulled her long brown hair into a messy bun and splashed water on her face in the bathroom, scrubbing away the worst of the mascara streaks. It wasn't much of an improvement, but it would have to do. When she opened the door, Asher stood there holding a tray laden with coffee, orange juice, toast, eggs, and fresh fruit. He looked different in daylight, dressed casually in jeans and a simple gray t-shirt rather than last night's tailored suit. Younger, somehow, less intimidating. "I wasn't sure what you liked," he said, seeming almost shy. "Or what your son eats. I have a nephew about his age who loves bananas, so I included some." "Thank you," Sloane said, stepping back to let him in. "This is very kind of you." She gestured vaguely at herself. "Sorry about, well, everything." Asher set the tray on the small dining table. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said firmly. "Nothing at all." He turned to Finn, who was watching him curiously. "Hey there, little guy. I'm Asher." To Sloane's surprise, Finn smiled and reached out a pudgy hand toward Asher. Her normally shy son, who clung to her like a barnacle around strangers, was actually responding positively. "This is Finn," she said, bouncing him slightly on her hip. "He's usually not this friendly with new people. Kids are good judges of character," Asher replied with a small smile. He looked back at Sloane, his expression turning serious. "How are you doing? Really?" The simple question, asked with genuine concern, nearly undid her. When was the last time anyone had asked how she was doing and actually wanted an honest answer? Griffin only ever asked so he could dismiss her feelings or use them against her later. "I don't know," she answered truthfully. "I haven't had time to process everything yet." She set Finn down, watching as he toddled over to investigate a colorful throw pillow on the couch. "I need to figure out what to do next." Asher nodded. "I understand, but please know you can stay here as long as you need to." "That's very generous, but I can't impose like that," Sloane protested. You've already done more than enough. It's not an imposition, he assured her. The guest house is just sitting empty most of the time anyway. He hesitated, then added, I know we barely know each other, but I want to help if I can. No one deserves what happened to you last night. Sloane felt tears threatening again, and blinked them back determinedly. She'd cried enough. Thank you, she managed, but I need to stand on my own feet. I've been depending on Griffin for too long, letting him make all the decisions. Look where that got me. A flash of admiration crossed Asher's face. That's a brave perspective, but accepting help when you need it isn't the same as being dependent. He glanced at his watch. I need to make some calls, but please, eat before it gets cold. We can talk more later if you want. After he left, Sloane sat at the table feeding small pieces of banana to Finn while picking at her own food. Despite her emotional turmoil, the eggs were delicious, and she realized how hungry she actually was. As she ate, she forced herself to think practically. First, she needed clothes, for both herself and Finn. Their house was out of the question. She couldn't face Griffin yet. She had a small emergency credit card that Griffin didn't know about, with maybe $1,000 of available credit. Not much to start a new life, but enough for immediate necessities. Next, she needed somewhere to stay. The guest house was a temporary solution at best. She couldn't rely on her husband's boss, no matter how kind he was being. Her grandmother's house was the obvious answer, but with tenants there for 3 more months, she'd need an alternative. Most importantly, she needed a plan for Finn. If she and Griffin were separating, and after last night there seemed no other option, custody would become an issue. The thought of Griffin using their son as a weapon against her made her shudder. A text message alert broke her train of thought. With trembling fingers, she checked her phone, half expecting a threatening message from Griffin. Instead, it was from an unknown number. It's Asher. Hope you don't mind. I got your number from the company directory. I've arranged for a locksmith to change the locks at your house at 1 o'clock. My security team confirmed Griffin isn't there. Apparently, he stayed at Ms. Winters's apartment. If you want to get some of your things, they can escort you. Just let me know. Sloane stared at the message, emotions warring within her, gratitude for his thoughtfulness, embarrassment at needing such help, fear at the thought of returning to the house, even with Griffin absent, and a small, surprising spark of strength. The first real step toward reclaiming her life was being offered, if she had the courage to take it. She typed back, "Thank you. I'd like to get our things, but changing the locks, is that legal?" His response came quickly. "Your name is on the deed too, right? You have every right to secure your home. My lawyer confirms this." Sloane hadn't even thought about the house deed. Griffin had handled all the paperwork when they bought the place, telling her she didn't need to worry her pretty little head about such complicated matters. But she remembered signing documents, and her name had definitely been included. It was her house, too. "Okay," she replied. "I'll be ready at 1. Setting down her phone, she looked at Finn, who had smeared banana across his face and was grinning proudly at his accomplishment. "Looks like we're going home to pack, little man," she told him, using a napkin to clean his sticky cheeks. "Just for a little while, to get our things. Then we're going to start something new." At precisely 1 o'clock, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside the guest house. Sloane had done her best to freshen up, washing her face and using her fingers to comb through her long hair. She still wore last night's dress, now hopelessly wrinkled, but she held her head high as she carried Finn to the waiting vehicle. The driver, a professional-looking woman in her 40s, introduced herself as Maria, head of Thornton's security team. "Mr. Thornton sends his apologies for not coming himself," she explained as they drove. "He thought his presence might complicate matters if your husband returned." Sloane nodded, grateful for his consideration. The drive to her house in the upscale subdivision took only 15 minutes, but it felt like traversing light years. How different her perspective was now from just 24 hours ago. The locksmith was already at work when they arrived, a burly man with kind eyes who tipped his hat to her. Almost done, ma'am. State-of-the-art locks, as requested. Your husband won't be getting in without permission. Thank you, Sloane said, the words feeling inadequate for the sense of security he was providing. Inside, the house looked exactly as she had left it yesterday. Immaculately clean and tastefully decorated, a showpiece rather than a home. Griffin had insisted on hiring an interior designer when they moved in, dismissing Sloane's more modest, comfortable style as tacky and provincial. Looking at the cold, modern furnishings now, she wondered how she had ever thought this sterile environment was an appropriate place to raise a child. "I'll need about an hour," she told Maria, who nodded and positioned herself discreetly by the front door. Sloane worked efficiently, starting in Finn's room. He packed his clothes, favorite toys, and the handmade quilt her mother had sent when he was born, the one Griffin had banished to the closet in favor of designer bedding. In her own bedroom, she took only essentials: jeans, t-shirts, comfortable shoes, underwear. She deliberately left all the expensive dresses and jewelry Griffin had given her, the items he'd selected to mold her into his idea of the perfect wife. In the bathroom, she hesitated over her wedding ring, which she'd removed to shower the previous morning and left in its usual spot by the sink. After a moment's consideration, she dropped it into a drawer. Let Griffin find it there. It would send a clearer message than words. She was just zipping the last suitcase when Maria appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said quietly, "we should leave soon. Your husband's car just turned onto the street." Sloane's heart hammered against her ribs. "Is he alone?" "Yes, ma'am." Taking a deep breath, Sloane nodded. "I need one more minute. Can you take these bags to the car? And Finn, please take Finn." She handed over her drowsy son, who had been napping on the bed beside her. Maria looked concerned, but took Finn gently. "1 minute," she agreed. "Then we really need to go." Alone in the bedroom, Sloane opened her jewelry box and removed the one piece that was truly hers, a delicate silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother. Inside was a tiny photo of her parents on one side, and now a picture of Finn on the other. She fastened it around her neck, feeling as though she was reclaiming a piece of her true self. Next, she went to Griffin's home office, heading straight for the filing cabinet where important documents were kept. She quickly located their marriage certificate, Finn's birth certificate, her social security card, and passport, all items Griffin had safeguarded for her. She tucked them into her purse just as she heard the front door open, followed by Griffin's angry voice. "What the hell is going on here? Who are you? Where's my wife?" Maria's calm, professional response floated up the stairs. "Sir, Mrs. Caldwell is gathering some personal belongings. I'm going to have to ask you to step back." "This is my house. You can't keep me out of my own house." "Actually, sir, the locks have been legally changed. Mrs. Caldwell has equal right to secure the property as a co-owner." "Just petit." Sloane stepped out of the office, forcing herself to walk slowly down the stairs, despite every instinct screaming at her to run. Griffin stood in the foyer, his handsome face contorted with rage, his normally perfect appearance disheveled. He clearly hadn't gone home to change since last night. His dress shirt was wrinkled, and stubble darkened his jaw. He looked like a stranger to her. "Sloane," he said when he saw her, his tone immediately shifting to the cajoling one he used when trying to manipulate her. "Baby, what are you doing? Come on, let's talk about this. Last night got out of hand, I admit it. I'd had too much to drink." "Where's Brielle this morning?" Sloane asked quietly, surprising herself with her composure. Griffin's face hardened. "That was nothing. A mistake. You know you're the only one who matters to me. Is that why you've been cheating on me for months?" Sloane reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped, maintaining a safe distance. "Is that why you humiliated me in front of your entire company?" "Don't be so dramatic," Griffin scoffed. "It was just a joke about your shoes, and Brielle meant nothing. It just happened because you've been so cold lately, always focusing on the baby instead of me." The familiar tactic, blaming her for his behavior, no longer worked its magic. Instead, Sloane felt a clarifying anger. "Our son," she corrected. His name is Finn, and he's not the baby. And I wasn't cold, Griffin. I was exhausted from doing everything while you stayed out late, working. Griffin's facade of contrition slipped, revealing the ugly truth beneath. Where is my son? What have you done with him? He's safe, Sloane replied, and he's going to stay that way. You can't keep my son from me, Griffin snarled, taking a step toward her. No court will give full custody to an unemployed, unstable woman. Maria moved between them smoothly. Sir, I need to ask you to step back. Griffin ignored her, his eyes fixed on Sloane. This is about Thornton, isn't it? You're sleeping with him. That's why he fired me. Mr. Thornton fired you because you behaved inappropriately and embarrassed the company, Maria interjected coolly. And I can personally verify that Mrs. Caldwell spent the night alone with her son in the guest house. Stay out of this, Griffin snapped at her, then turned back to Sloane. You think you can just walk away? After everything I've done for you? You were nothing when I found you, teaching snot-nosed brats for pennies, living in that dump your grandmother left you. Each insult strengthened Sloane's resolve rather than weakening it. That dump is still mine, she said calmly, and I loved teaching those children. I was happy before I met you, Griffin. I'd forgotten that until now. You'll never make it without me, he sneered. You'll come crawling back within a week, begging me to take you back. No, Sloane said, the simple word carrying the weight of her newfound determination. I won't. She moved toward the door, where Maria stood with Finn, who was watching the exchange with wide, confused eyes. Griffin's expression shifted to panic as he realized she was actually leaving. Sloane, wait, he said, his voice softening again. We can work this out. Go to counseling or something, for Finn's sake. The manipulation was so transparent now that she could see it clearly. Goodbye, Griffin, she said, taking Finn from Maria and heading for the door. This isn't over, Griffin shouted after her. You'll regret this, Sloane. No one leaves me. His threats followed her out to the car, but for the first time in years, Sloane didn't feel afraid of Griffin's anger. Instead, she felt something unexpected as the SUV pulled away from the house that had never really been her home. Hope. 3 weeks had passed since the night of the party. 3 weeks of monumental change that left Sloane feeling as though she'd been swept up in a whirlwind. The first few days had been a blur of practical matters, finding temporary housing, consulting with a lawyer, filing for divorce, applying for a restraining order after Griffin's increasingly threatening messages. Through it all, Asher had been an unexpected source of support, offering not just the continued use of his guest house, but connections to professionals who could help her navigate her new reality. I can't thank you enough, Sloane told him one evening as they sat on the guest house porch. Finn was already asleep inside, exhausted from a day of toddler explorations. The early summer air was warm, tinged with the scent of jasmine from the flowering vines that climbed the porch trellis. I don't know what I would have done without your help. Asher shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed by her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, Sloane said firmly. They wouldn't have. Most people would have stayed out of it, called it a private matter between husband and wife. She twisted the glass of lemonade in her hands, watching the condensation trail down the sides. That's what happened before, when people suspected something was wrong. They looked the other way. Asher's expression darkened. They shouldn't have. No one deserves to be treated the way Griffin treated you. The directness of his statement made Sloane uncomfortable, not because it wasn't true, but because she was still struggling to fully accept it herself. 3 years of Griffin's manipulation had left deep marks on her psyche, making her doubt her own worth, her own perceptions. Her therapist, another resource Asher had helped her find, called it gaslighting, this systematic undermining of her reality. Recognizing it was the first step toward healing, but the journey was proving longer and more difficult than she'd anticipated. My lawyer thinks the divorce will go through quickly, she said, changing the subject slightly. Griffin isn't contesting it, surprisingly. That's good news, Asher said, though his tone suggested he was skeptical. Has he stopped trying to contact you? Sloane sighed. The messages have slowed down since the restraining order, but he's finding other ways. He sent a massive flower arrangement to my parents' house in Arizona yesterday, with a card begging them to convince me to come back to him. What did your parents do? Donated the flowers to a nursing home and blocked his number, Sloane replied with a small smile. Her parents had been shocked by her situation but ultimately supportive, offering to fly out to help her or welcoming her to move back to Arizona. She had declined both offers for now, determined to rebuild her life on her own terms. They never really liked him, it turns out. They just wanted me to be happy. Smart people, your parents, Asher commented, making her laugh. These evening conversations had become a regular occurrence over the past weeks. Asher would return from work, check if she needed anything, and often end up staying to talk. At first, Sloane had been wary, wondering if he had ulterior motives for his kindness, but there had never been any pressure, never any hint that he expected anything in return. He was simply a decent human being, something she had almost forgotten existed after years with Griffin. I have some news, she said, after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. I got a job. Asher's face lit up with genuine pleasure. That's wonderful. Where? Meadowbrook Elementary, she replied, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. It's a first-grade position, just like I used to teach. The previous teacher is moving out of state, so they needed someone to start mid-year. It's not ideal timing, but the principal was understanding about my situation. When do you start? Next Monday. Sloane took a deep breath, her anxiety about the change mingling with anticipation. It feels surreal, going back to teaching after all this time. Griffin always made it sound like such a lowly profession, not worthy of his wife. Griffin is an idiot, Asher stated matter-of-factly, making Sloane choke on her lemonade with unexpected laughter. Sorry, but it's true. Teaching is one of the most important professions there is. My third-grade teacher, Mrs. Patel, changed my life completely. I was a shy kid with undiagnosed dyslexia, convinced I was stupid because I couldn't read as well as the other kids. She was the one who figured out what was going on and got me the help I needed. Sloane smiled at the image of a young Asher, struggling but determined. She sounds wonderful. She was, he agreed. I still send her a card every Christmas. He hesitated, then asked, What about Finn while you're working? I found a daycare center near the school, Sloane explained. It's expensive, but my lawyer managed to get temporary child support ordered, and with my teaching salary, we should be okay. She didn't mention that the amount Griffin had been ordered to pay was a fraction of what she had requested, or that her okay financial situation would be tight at best. She was determined not to rely on Asher's generosity any more than she already had. As if reading her thoughts, Asher said gently, You know you can stay here as long as you need to, right? There's no rush to find your own place until you're ready. I appreciate that, Sloane replied, but I think it's important for me to stand on my own feet as soon as possible. My tenant's lease is up in 6 weeks, and my lawyer says there's no legal reason I can't move back into my grandmother's house then. The thought of returning to the cozy craftsman bungalow she'd inherited filled her with a warm sense of homecoming. I never should have let Griffin talk me into renting it out. Why did you? Asher asked, then immediately held up a hand. Sorry, that's none of my business. No, it's a fair question, Sloane said, remembering how Griffin had gradually chipped away at her attachment to the house. It had started with small criticisms. The plumbing was outdated, the kitchen too small, the neighborhood not prestigious enough for a rising executive like him. Then came the financial arguments. They could use the rental income. Property values in that area were declining. It was a poor investment to leave it sitting empty. By the time he suggested renting it out, she had been so worn down that she'd agreed just to avoid another argument. He was very persuasive, and I was very compliant. You're not anymore, Asher observed with a smile. I've seen how fiercely you've fought for yourself and Finn these past weeks. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, Sloane. His words warmed her in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine appreciation, rather than conditional approval. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing that in me, even when I couldn't see it in myself." Their eyes met, and for a moment, something shifted in the air between them. Sloane looked away first, uncomfortable with the flutter in her stomach. It was too soon, too complicated. Her divorce wasn't even final, and Asher was still technically Griffin's former boss. Besides, she needed to focus on rebuilding her life and caring for Finn, not jumping into another relationship. "I should get inside," she said, standing abruptly. "Early morning tomorrow. I need to go shopping for some professional clothes before I start work." Asher rose as well, respecting her sudden need for distance. "Of course. Good night, Sloane, and congratulations again on the job." "Good night, and thanks for everything." Inside the guest house, Sloane checked on Finn, who was sleeping peacefully in his portable crib, one arm wrapped around his favorite stuffed elephant. The sight of him, so innocent, so trusting, reinforced her determination to create a better life for them both. She would never again allow anyone to make her feel small or unworthy, not when this perfect little human looked to her for his sense of what the world should be. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect early summer day. Sloane dressed Finn in a dinosaur t-shirt and shorts, packed his diaper bag with snacks and toys, and headed out for her shopping expedition. The mall was quiet on a weekday morning, making it easier to navigate with a stroller. She was examining a simple navy blazer, checking the price tag with a slight wince, when a familiar voice made her blood run cold. "Playing dress-up for your new boyfriend?" Griffin stood a few feet away, impeccably dressed in one of his designer suits, his handsome face set in lines of contempt. Instinctively, Sloane stepped in front of Finn's stroller, shielding him. "You're violating the restraining order," she said, proud that her voice remained steady despite her racing heart. "You need to leave, or I'm calling security." Griffin smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "It's a public place, Sloane. I'm just doing some shopping, same as you." Pure coincidence. They both knew it wasn't. Somehow he'd been tracking her movements, waiting for an opportunity to corner her when she was alone. "What do you want, Griffin?" she asked, her hand slipping into her purse to grip her phone. "I want my family back," he replied, his tone softening to the persuasive one he used when trying to manipulate her. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Sloane. I made mistakes. I know that, but we can work through this, for Finn's sake." "No," Sloane said firmly, tightening her grip on the stroller handle. "We're getting divorced. It's over." Griffin's facade cracked slightly, a flash of anger crossing his features before he controlled it. "Is this about money? Because I can be generous in the settlement if you drop this restraining order nonsense and let me see my son." "It's not about money," Sloane replied, even as a part of her noted the irony that Griffin thought he could buy his way out of the consequences of his actions. "It's about respect, safety, setting a good example for our son." "Our son," Griffin repeated, his gaze shifting to Finn, who was contentedly playing with a small toy in his stroller, oblivious to the tension. "He needs his father, Sloane. You can't keep him from me forever." "I'm not trying to keep him from you," Sloane said, a partial truth. While she had concerns about Griffin's parenting, her lawyer had advised her that unless she had evidence of direct abuse toward Finn, the courts would likely grant some form of visitation. But any relationship with Finn will have to be through proper legal channels, with appropriate supervision. Griffin's face darkened. "Supervision? Like I'm some kind of criminal? All because I threw your shoes out a window? Don't you think you're being a little dramatic?" The dismissal of his behavior was so typical, so expected, that Sloane almost laughed. "It wasn't about the shoes, Griffin. It was about years of controlling behavior, emotional abuse, infidelity, and public humiliation. The shoes were just the final straw." "Emotional abuse?" Griffin scoffed. "Now you sound like one of those daytime talk shows. I gave you everything, Sloane. A beautiful home, financial security, a lifestyle most women would kill for, and this is how you repay me? Before Sloane could respond, a mall security guard approached, looking between them with professional concern. "Is everything okay here, ma'am?" he asked, addressing Sloane. "No," she replied clearly. "This man is violating a restraining order. I have the paperwork in my purse." Griffin's expression twisted with rage before he quickly composed himself, turning to the guard with his most charming smile. "There's been a misunderstanding. I'm her husband. We're just having a discussion about our son." The security guard looked to Sloane for confirmation, and she shook her head firmly. "Ex-husband. Soon," she corrected. "And there's a court order requiring him to stay at least 200 feet away from me and our son." More security personnel arrived as Sloane produced the restraining order documentation from her purse. Griffin's charm offensive quickly deteriorated as he realized he wasn't going to intimidate his way out of the situation. "This isn't over, Sloane," he said as the guards escorted him away. "You can't hide behind restraining orders and your boyfriend forever." Sloane watched him go, her hands trembling with delayed reaction. Finn, sensing her distress, began to fuss in his stroller. She knelt down to comfort him, murmuring reassurances that everything was okay, that they were safe. But were they? Griffin's appearance today proved he was still fixated on them, still unwilling to accept that she had left him. His mention of hiding behind your boyfriend suggested he believed the rumors that she and Asher were involved, rumors that had apparently spread throughout his former workplace, according to texts from Brielle that Griffin had forwarded to Sloane in an attempt to hurt her. The thought that Griffin might transfer his rage to Asher troubled her deeply. Asher had done nothing but help her when she needed it most, expecting nothing in return. He didn't deserve to be drawn into Griffin's vendetta. After filing a report about the restraining order violation, Sloane abandoned her shopping plans and headed back to the guest house, her mind racing with contingency plans. Perhaps she should move to Arizona after all, put more physical distance between her family and Griffin. But running felt like letting him win, like admitting she couldn't build a life on her own terms. That evening, she was still wrestling with her thoughts when Asher returned from work. One look at her face told him something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, immediately concerned. Sloane told him about the encounter at the mall, watching his expression darken as she described Griffin's veiled threats. "I'm calling my security team," Asher said when she finished. "They'll increase patrols around the property, and I want someone to accompany you when you go out until we're sure he's not following you." "I can't ask you to do that," Sloane protested. "You've already done so much, and now I'm putting you at risk too. Griffin thinks we're involved. He might target you next." Asher shrugged, unconcerned. "Let him try. Unlike you, I don't have a history with Griffin that makes me vulnerable to his manipulation. And I have resources he can only dream of." He softened his tone, seeing her distress. "Sloane, this is not your fault. None of it. You have every right to rebuild your life without fear." "I know," she said, though the words felt hollow. Intellectually, she understood she wasn't responsible for Griffin's behavior, but emotionally, the guilt was harder to shake. "I just hate that I've dragged you into this mess." "You didn't drag me anywhere," Asher countered. "I offered my help willingly, and I don't regret it for a second." He hesitated, then added, "I consider you a friend, Sloane, and I protect my friends." A friend. The word should have been comforting, and in many ways it was, but Sloane couldn't ignore the small pang of something else that accompanied it. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the practical. "Thank you," she said simply. "I accept your help for now, but I'm still planning to move back to my house as soon as the tenant's lease is up." Asher nodded. "Of course, independence is important to you, and I respect that. Just promise me you'll be careful, and that you'll let me know if Griffin approaches you again." "I promise," Sloane agreed, though she privately hoped there would be no need. Perhaps today's incident would result in legal consequences that would finally make Griffin back off. But that hope was shattered 3 days later when Sloane arrived at Meadowbrook Elementary for her first day of teaching. She had just dropped Finn at the nearby daycare center and was walking toward the school entrance, a mix of nervousness and excitement fluttering in her stomach, when she spotted a familiar figure waiting by the main doors. Griffin stood with his hands in his pockets, looking for all the world like a concerned parent, rather than a man violating a restraining order for the second time in a week. Sloane froze, calculating her options. She could turn around, avoid the confrontation, but that would mean being late on her first day. She could call the police, but they might not arrive in time. Or she could hold her ground and hope that the public setting would deter Griffin from causing a scene. Decision made, she straightened her spine and continued walking, veering to the side to use a different entrance. Griffin spotted her and moved to intercept, his face a mask of contrition. "Sloane, please," he called. "Just 5 minutes." She kept walking, eyes fixed on the door ahead, acutely aware of curious glances from parents dropping off their children. This was exactly what she'd feared. Her private drama spilling over into her professional life before it had even begun. Griffin reached the door just as she did, holding it open in a mockery of gentlemanly behavior. "I just want to talk," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "About Finn. I miss my son." "This isn't the place," Sloane replied, equally quietly. "And you're violating the restraining order again. Please leave before I have to call the police." "You wouldn't make a scene at your new job," Griffin said with confidence. "What would all these nice parents think if they saw their children's teacher having her husband arrested?" The manipulation was so transparent that Sloane almost laughed. The old Griffin's tricks no longer worked on the new Sloane. "They'd think I'm a woman who values her safety and the rule of law," she replied calmly. "Now, move aside, or I will make that scene you're so afraid of." Something in her tone must have convinced him she was serious, because Griffin stepped back, his expression hardening. "This crusade of independence won't last, Sloane," he said. "You'll realize soon enough that you need me, that Finn needs me." "Goodbye, Griffin," she said firmly, walking through the door without looking back. Despite the unsettling start, Sloane's first day of teaching went remarkably well. Her new colleagues were welcoming, the children adorable and eager to connect with their new teacher, and the principal supportive when Sloane discreetly explained the situation with Griffin. By the time she picked up Finn from daycare, her spirits had lifted considerably. "We're going to be okay," she told her son as they drove back to the guest house. "More than okay. We're going to be happy." Finn babbled his agreement from his car seat, making her smile. At not quite 18 months, he understood more than he could express, absorbing the emotional atmosphere around him like a sponge. All the more reason to ensure that atmosphere was filled with love, security, and joy, rather than tension and fear. When they arrived at the guest house, Maria from Asher's security team was waiting to escort them inside, a new precaution following Griffin's appearance at the mall. Sloane had initially resisted the idea of a security detail, finding it excessive, but today's incident at the school had changed her perspective. "Any problems today, Mrs. Caldwell?" Maria asked as they walked to the door. "Griffin showed up at my school this morning," Sloane admitted. "He didn't do anything threatening, just wanted to talk, but it was definitely another violation of the restraining order." Maria's expression remained professional, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Did you report it?" "Yes. I called my lawyer from my lunch break. She's filing the paperwork now." "Good," Maria nodded approvingly. Documentation is important in these situations. Inside, Sloane settled Finn with his toys and started preparing a simple dinner, her mind replaying the day's events. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't hear Asher's knock at first, only noticing his presence when Finn squealed in delight at seeing him. "Sorry to interrupt," Asher said from the doorway. "I wanted to see how your first day went." "It was good," Sloane replied with a genuine smile. "The kids are wonderful." She hesitated, then added, "Griffin showed up at the school this morning, but I handled it." Asher's expression darkened. "That's twice in 1 week. The police need to take this seriously." "My lawyer is on it," Sloane assured him. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" It's just spaghetti, nothing fancy, but there's plenty. The invitation surprised them both. Despite their evening conversations on the porch, they had maintained certain boundaries. Asher had never eaten a meal with them, never stepped fully into their temporary home life. "I'd like that," he said after a moment. "If you're sure it's not an imposition." "It's the least I can do, after everything you've done for us," Sloane replied, gesturing for him to come in. "Besides, Finn clearly wants you to stay." She nodded toward her son, who was holding out a toy car to Asher with an expectant expression. The evening that followed was unexpectedly pleasant, comfortable in a way Sloane hadn't experienced in years. Asher sat on the floor with Finn, building block towers for the toddler to knock down with infectious giggles. Later, over simple spaghetti and garlic bread, they talked about Sloane's students, Asher's work challenges, and a dozen other ordinary topics that had nothing to do with Griffin or restraining orders or divorce proceedings. It felt, Sloane realized with a start, like family time. The thought both warmed and frightened her. It was too soon to think that way, too complicated given their circumstances. And yet, watching Asher gently wipe spaghetti sauce from Finn's chin with a napkin, she couldn't help but compare his natural, caring interaction with her son to Griffin's perpetual impatience and disinterest. "Thank you for dinner," Asher said as he helped clear the plates. "And for the company. I usually eat alone at my desk or in front of the TV." "That sounds lonely," Sloane commented, surprised. Somehow, she had imagined his life filled with sophisticated dinner parties and business networking events. Asher shrugged. "I'm used to it. My work keeps me busy, and I've never been much for the social scene." "No girlfriend? Partner?" The question slipped out before Sloane could stop it, and she immediately felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "Sorry, that's none of my business." "It's fine," Asher assured her with a smile. "And no girlfriend. I was engaged once, about 5 years ago, but it didn't work out." He didn't elaborate, and Sloane didn't press for details. As he prepared to leave, Asher paused at the door. "I meant to tell you earlier. I've hired additional security for the property, and I've arranged for someone to keep an eye on your school as well, just as a precaution. They'll be discreet," he added, seeing her hesitation. "The principal already knows and approved it." "Thank you," Sloane said, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I hope it won't be necessary for long." "So do I," Asher replied. "Good night, Sloane." "Good night, Finn," he added, waving to the toddler, who waved back enthusiastically. After he left, Sloane went through Finn's bedtime routine mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Despite the tumult of the past weeks and today's unsettling encounter with Griffin, she felt an unfamiliar sense of peace settling over her. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was making her own choices, standing on her own 2 feet, with help, yes, but not with strings attached, not with demands for gratitude or compliance or submission. As she tucked Finn into his crib, she whispered a promise to him, "We're going to build a good life, little one. A life filled with respect and kindness and joy." And for the first time, she truly believed it was possible. The shrill ring of Sloane's phone jolted her awake at 3:17 in the morning, 2 months after her first day of teaching. She fumbled for it in the darkness, heart racing at the unexpected disruption. Unknown numbers calling in the middle of the night rarely brought good news. "Hello?" she answered cautiously, her voice husky with sleep. "Mrs. Caldwell? This is Officer Martinez with the County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling about your husband, Griffin Caldwell." Sloane sat up, instantly alert. "Ex-husband," she corrected automatically. Their divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago, after Griffin had unexpectedly stopped contesting it. "What about him?" "There's been an incident," the officer continued. "Mr. Caldwell has been arrested for attempted assault and breaking and entering. The victim is an Asher Thornton. Our records show you have a connection to both men." The room seemed to tilt around her. "Is Asher Mr. Thornton? Is he all right?" "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Thornton is fine. Just some minor injuries. He's being treated at County General Hospital as a precaution. Mr. Caldwell forced his way into his home tonight and attacked him, but security personnel intervened before serious harm could occur. Sloane closed her eyes, a wave of nausea washing over her. She had feared something like this might happen, had warned Asher that Griffin's increasingly erratic behavior might eventually target him. Griffin had been escalating over the past weeks, more violations of the restraining order, thinly veiled threats, even an attempt to get Sloane fired from her teaching position by making false claims to the school board. Each thwarted effort had only fueled his rage. "Mrs. Caldwell? Are you still there?" "Yes," she managed. "I'm sorry. This is just shocking." "Mr. Thornton asked us to inform you of the situation," the officer continued. "He was concerned you might be at risk as well, but we've verified that Mr. Caldwell has been in custody since the incident." "Thank you," Sloane said, her mind racing. "Will he be released on bail?" "Not immediately. Given the nature of the charges and his history of restraining order violations, the judge has ordered him held until a bail hearing, which won't be until Monday at the earliest. 3 days. 3 days of safety, of not looking over her shoulder. It shouldn't have felt like such a relief." "I understand. Thank you for letting me know." After hanging up, Sloane sat in the darkness, processing what she'd just learned. Griffin had actually attacked Asher, had physically acted on the threats he'd been making for weeks. And Asher was in the hospital because of it, because of her. The guilt was overwhelming, a physical pressure on her chest that made it difficult to breathe. If she hadn't accepted Asher's help, if she'd just handled Griffin on her own somehow. She glanced at the clock. 3:26. Too early to call anyone, too late to go back to sleep. Finn was still slumbering peacefully in his crib, unaware of the turmoil surrounding the adults in his life. Sloane envied him that innocence. By 6 o'clock, having paced and worried for hours, she made a decision. She called Maria, who had become a friend as well as a protector over the past months. "I need to go to the hospital," Sloane said after explaining the situation. "Can you watch Finn? I don't want to take him there." "Of course," Maria replied without hesitation. "I'll be right over. But Sloane, be careful. Even with Griffin in custody, this situation is volatile." Sloane dressed quickly in jeans and a simple blouse, brushed her hair into a ponytail, and waited anxiously for Maria to arrive. When she did, Sloane gave her instructions for Finn's morning routine, kissed her still sleeping son, and headed out into the dawn light. County General was quiet at that early hour, the emergency room nearly empty as Sloane approached the reception desk. "I'm here to see Asher Thornton," she said, suddenly uncertain. What if he didn't want to see her? What if he blamed her for this situation? As he should. "Room 312, the nurse told her after checking her computer. "He's being discharged this morning. You can go up." The elevator ride to the 3rd floor gave Sloane time to second-guess her decision to come. But the need to see for herself that Asher was truly all right, to apologize face-to-face for the danger her presence in his life had brought, propelled her forward. She paused outside room 312, taking a deep breath before knocking softly on the half-open door. "Come in," Asher's voice called. He was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, fully dressed in what appeared to be the same clothes from the previous day, now rumpled and stained. A white bandage stood out starkly against his forehead, and his left eye was swollen and beginning to bruise. When he saw Sloane, his expression shifted from wariness to surprise. "Sloane," he said, standing up too quickly and wincing at the movement. "What are you doing here?" "The police called me," she replied, fighting the urge to rush to him, to check his injuries for herself. Instead, she remained by the door, hands clasped tightly together. "I had to come, to see that you were okay, to apologize." Asher frowned, then winced again as the movement pulled at what must have been a cut beneath the bandage. "Apologize? For what?" "For this." Sloane gestured at his injuries. "For Griffin. For all of it. If I hadn't involved you in my problems—" "Stop," Asher interrupted firmly. "This is not your fault. Not any of it. Griffin's actions are his responsibility alone, not yours. But if I hadn't accepted your help, then what? Asher challenged. Where would you and Finn be now? Still trapped in an abusive marriage? Or trying to navigate this difficult situation entirely on your own? He shook his head. I made my own choices, Sloane. I knew there were risks in helping you, and I accepted them willingly. The tears Sloane had been fighting spilled over. He could have killed you, but he didn't. Asher replied gently. Thanks to my security team, he barely laid a hand on me. This, he touched the bandage on his forehead, was from falling against a table during the scuffle. And this, he indicated his swollen eye, was the only punch he managed to land before they took him down. Sloane crossed the room without thinking, reaching out to lightly touch the bruising around his eye. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Asher caught her hand, holding it carefully. Stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault, he said, his voice soft but firm. The only person responsible for Griffin's actions is Griffin. The door opened behind them, and Sloane quickly withdrew her hand as a doctor entered, clipboard in hand. Mr. Thornton, your discharge paperwork is ready, the doctor said, glancing between them with professional detachment. No signs of concussion, but take it easy for a few days and come back if you experience any dizziness, nausea, or changes in vision. Thank you, doctor, Asher replied. Once they were alone again, an awkward silence fell between them. Sloane broke it first. Can I drive you home? Asher hesitated. Actually, I was going to call a car. I'm not sure my house is the best place to be right now. The police are still processing it as a crime scene. Oh, Sloane hadn't considered that. Where will you go? A hotel, probably. Just for a day or two. The words were out of Sloane's mouth before she could reconsider them. You could stay at the guest house. It seems only fair, since I've been staying in your guest house for months. Asher looked surprised, then uncertain. I couldn't impose on you and Finn. It's not an imposition, Sloane echoed his own words back to him. Besides, Maria is with Finn right now, and I'd feel better knowing you weren't alone after— He trailed off, gesturing at his injuries. After a moment's consideration, Asher nodded. All right, thank you. The drive back to the estate was mostly silent, both of them processing the night's events in their own thoughts. When they arrived at the guest house, Maria greeted them with wide eyes at Asher's appearance, but had the tact not to comment. Finn, playing happily on the floor with his blocks, let out a delighted squeal when he saw Asher and immediately toddled over, arms raised in a universal request to be picked up. Careful, buddy, Asher said with a smile, gingerly lifting the boy despite his bruises. I'm a little banged up today. Sloane watched them, a lump forming in her throat, at how naturally they interacted, how easily Asher had slipped into their lives. Over the past months, as she had slowly rebuilt her confidence and independence, Asher had been a constant source of support, without ever crossing boundaries or making demands. He had played with Finn, listened to Sloane's fears and triumphs, offered advice when asked, but never pushed his opinions on her. He had, in short, become her friend, perhaps her best friend. And now, because of that friendship, he was injured and temporarily homeless. I'll make some coffee, she said, needing something concrete to do with the emotions swirling inside her. Maria, thank you so much for staying with Finn. I can take it from here. Are you sure? Maria asked, her concern evident. I can stay if you need me. We'll be fine, Sloane assured her. Griffin's in custody, and we're safe here. After Maria left, Sloane busied herself in the small kitchen while Asher sat on the floor with Finn, seemingly content despite his injuries. The domesticity of the scene struck her forcefully. How different it was from her life with Griffin, where moments of peace had been rare and conditional on his mood. Here, she said, handing Asher a mug of coffee once it was ready. You must be exhausted. I've had better nights, he admitted, taking the mug gratefully. Though I've had worse, too. Sloane sat beside him on the couch, watching as Finn stacked blocks with intense concentration. What happened, exactly, if you don't mind telling me? Asher sighed, running a hand through his hair. I was working late in my home office when the alarm went off. Before security could respond, Griffin had already broken through the terrace door. He was, not himself, ranting about how I'd stolen his life, his wife, his job. He seemed convinced we'd been having an affair all along. Sloane winced. The rumors at your company? Apparently, Asher nodded. He came at me with a broken bottle. I think he'd been drinking heavily before he arrived. We struggled. I fell against my desk, and that's when security finally got to us. They restrained him until the police arrived. He took a sip of his coffee. The whole thing probably lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt much longer. Did he say anything about Finn or me? About coming after us next? Sloane couldn't help asking, fear for her son overriding everything else. No, Asher replied. His focus seemed to be entirely on me. That's why I had the police call you. I was worried he might have tried to get to you first. The relief that Finn hadn't been mentioned was tempered by concern for Asher. I still feel responsible, she admitted quietly. Well, don't, Asher said firmly. Griffin is responsible for Griffin, and now he'll face consequences for his actions. They fell into silence, sipping their coffee and watching Finn play. Eventually, Asher's exhaustion became evident as he struggled to keep his eyes open. You should rest, Sloane said. You can take the bedroom. Finn and I can use the pull-out couch. I can't take your bed, Asher protested. You're injured and you haven't slept all night, Sloane countered. Please, Asher, let me help you for once. Too tired to argue further, Asher conceded. Sloane showed him to the bedroom, where he practically collapsed onto the bed, barely taking time to remove his shoes before sleep claimed him. Throughout the day, as Sloane went about her usual Saturday routine with Finn, she found herself checking on Asher periodically. He slept deeply, undisturbed by the normal noises of their activities. Around noon, she gently woke him to take the pain medication the hospital had prescribed, which he did before immediately falling back asleep. By evening, when he finally emerged from the bedroom looking rumpled but more rested, Sloane had prepared a simple dinner of roast chicken and vegetables. That smells amazing, Asher said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. How long was I out? About 12 hours, Sloane replied with a small smile. You obviously needed it. They ate dinner together, the conversation deliberately light for Finn's benefit. After the toddler was bathed and put to bed, however, the gravity of their situation returned. The police called while you were sleeping, Sloane told Asher as they sat on the porch, much as they had done so many evenings before. They wanted to know if I'd be willing to testify about Griffin's pattern of behavior. Apparently, he's claiming temporary insanity, saying the stress of our divorce pushed him over the edge. Asher's expression hardened. That's convenient and completely untrue. I know, Sloane sighed. I told them I'd testify. The detective mentioned they found a journal in Griffin's apartment, filled with plans to get revenge on both of us. They think it's evidence of premeditation, not a temporary break. That's good, right? It strengthens the case against him. Yes, Sloane agreed. But it also means this wasn't just a drunken impulse. He's been planning this, possibly for months. The implications hung heavily between them. Griffin's obsession had not diminished with time. If anything, it had intensified. And while he was currently in custody, he wouldn't remain there forever. I've been thinking, Asher said after a long pause. Maybe it's time for a fresh start? For both of us. Sloane looked at him quizzically. What do you mean? I've been offered a position at our company's Seattle office, Asher explained. CEO of the Northwest Division. I've been considering it for a while, but I wasn't sure about uprooting my life here. He met her eyes directly. But now, given everything that's happened, maybe a change would be good. Oh, Sloane said, surprised by the hollow feeling that formed in her chest at the thought of Asher moving away. When would you go? Not immediately. There are details to work out, but within the next month or two. He hesitated, then added, and I was wondering if you might consider coming too. Not with me, he clarified quickly, seeing her expression. Just to the same city. A completely fresh start for you and Finn, far from Griffin and all these painful memories. The offer stunned Sloane into silence. Leave? Move across the country? Start completely over? The thought was both terrifying and oddly appealing. Her life here was finally stabilizing. She had her teaching job, Finn was settled in daycare, and she was moving back into her grandmother's house next week. But the shadow of Griffin still loomed large over everything. I don't know, she said finally. That's a huge decision. Of course, Asher nodded. I'm not asking for an answer now. Just something to think about. Why? Sloane asked abruptly. Why do you care what happens to us? Why have you done so much for me and Finn? The question had been building for months. And now, in the aftermath of Griffin's attack, she needed to understand. What did Asher want from her? There had to be something, didn't there? No one was this kind without an agenda. Asher looked away, his profile illuminated by the porch light. At first, it was just basic human decency. You needed help, and I was in a position to offer it. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. But then I got to know you, and Finn. I saw your strength. Your determination to build a better life despite everything working against you. I admired that, and somewhere along the way, you both became important to me. He turned back to face her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way Griffin's never had been. I care about what happens to you because I care about you, Sloane. It's as simple and as complicated as that. The honesty in his voice took her breath away. Griffin had said all the right words during their courtship, had professed love and devotion, but his actions had always belied those pretty phrases. Asher, on the other hand, had never made grand declarations or promises, but every action had demonstrated genuine care and respect. I don't know what to say, Sloane admitted. You don't have to say anything, Asher assured her. I'm not asking for anything from you. I just wanted you to know that my offer of a fresh start in Seattle comes from a place of caring, not obligation or pity. They sat in silence for a while, the night sounds of crickets and distant traffic filling the space between them. Eventually, Sloane spoke. I need to think about it. Moving would be a huge change for Finn, and I've just started rebuilding my life here. Of course, Asher nodded. Take all the time you need. The offer stands regardless. The next morning, Asher's security team called to inform him that the police had finished processing his house. He could return home if he wished. Sloane felt an unexpected pang at the news. Their brief role reversal, with her caring for him instead of the other way around, had shifted something between them, created a new dynamic she wasn't quite ready to relinquish. You're welcome to stay longer, she offered, as he gathered the few belongings he'd brought from the hospital. Until you're feeling better. Asher smiled. I'm okay, really. And you're moving back to your grandmother's house in a few days. You have enough to deal with without worrying about me. I'll still worry, Sloane admitted. I know, he replied softly. That's who you are. He hesitated at the door, seeming reluctant to leave despite his assurances. Think about Seattle, he said finally. Not for me, but for yourself, for the life you want to build with Finn. I will, Sloane promised. After he left, the guest house felt emptier than it had in months, despite Finn's energetic presence. Sloane went through the motions of their Sunday routine, breakfast, playtime, nap time, while her mind churned with possibilities. Seattle, a city she'd never visited, thousands of miles from everything familiar. No support system, no friends, no established job, but also no Griffin, no painful memories, no looking over her shoulder. A truly fresh start. But could she do it? Move across the country based on the suggestion of a man she'd known for only a few months? A man who, despite all evidence to the contrary, might have his own agenda she couldn't yet see. Griffin's voice whispered in her mind, echoes of his constant undermining. You can't make it on your own. You need me. You're nothing without me. But she had made it on her own these past months. Yes, she'd accepted help, but she'd also found her own strength, made her own decisions, rebuilt her confidence piece by piece. She was a good teacher, a loving mother, a woman who had survived an abusive relationship and emerged stronger for it. Whatever she decided about Seattle, she would make that decision based on what was best for her and Finn, not out of fear or dependency. Later that evening, as she packed some of their belongings for the move back to her grandmother's house, her phone rang. It was Asher. "I just wanted to check that you and Finn are okay," he said when she answered. "We're fine," she assured him. "How about you? How's your head?" "Better. The swelling's gone down a lot." He paused. "I have some news. Griffin's bail hearing was moved up to today, and the judge denied bail. He'll remain in custody until the trial." Relief flooded through Sloane. That's good news." "It is," Asher agreed. "It means you can focus on your move without worrying about him showing up." "Thank you for letting me know," Sloane said, realizing how much lighter she felt knowing Griffin would remain behind bars. "And Asher, I've been thinking about what you said, about Seattle. And I'm not saying no," she replied carefully. "I need more information about schools, housing, job opportunities, but I'm considering it." She could hear the smile in his voice when he responded. "I'll get you everything you need to make an informed decision. No pressure, I promise." After they hung up, Sloane continued packing, a new sense of possibility warming her from within. For the first time since leaving Griffin, she was thinking about the future, not just in terms of survival and stability, but in terms of dreams and opportunities. Whatever she decided about Seattle, that shift in perspective felt like victory. The gentle patter of Seattle rain against the windows provided a soothing backdrop as Sloane moved quietly through the living room of her new apartment, picking up Finn's scattered toys. 6 months had passed since Griffin's arrest, 5 since his conviction for attempted assault and breaking and entering, and 4 since she had made the life-changing decision to move across the country for a fresh start. It hadn't been an easy choice. She had agonized over leaving her teaching position, her newly reclaimed grandmother's house, and the few friends she had managed to reconnect with. But in the end, the promise of true freedom, from fear, from constantly looking over her shoulder, from the whispers and pitying glances that followed her in a town where everyone knew her story, had been too compelling to ignore. Griffin's trial had been mercifully brief. With the evidence from his journal, the security footage from Asher's home, and testimony from both Sloane and Asher, the prosecution had built an ironclad case. Griffin had been sentenced to 3 years in prison, with mandatory counseling and a permanent restraining order upon release. It was more than Sloane had dared to hope for, but even with Griffin safely incarcerated, the shadow of his presence had lingered over her life in ways she couldn't ignore. The move to Seattle had been a leap of faith. Asher had gone first, to set up the Northwest Division office and find his own place to live. He had helped from afar with research on neighborhoods, schools, and teaching opportunities, but had been careful to give Sloane space to make her own decisions. When she and Finn had finally arrived 2 months later, it had been to a city of strangers, intimidating but also exhilarating in its blank slate possibilities. Now, as autumn painted the Pacific Northwest in shades of gold and crimson, Sloane was settling into a rhythm that felt remarkably like normalcy. She had found a position teaching first grade at a progressive elementary school that valued her child-centered approach. Finn, now a chatty 2-year-old with Griffin's blue eyes, but, thankfully, none of his temperament, was thriving in a small daycare center just blocks from their apartment. And Sloane herself was slowly, cautiously, beginning to believe in the possibility of happiness again. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She glanced at the clock. 7:30, right on time. Asher was nothing if not punctual. Their relationship had evolved since the move, shifting into something neither of them had defined, but both seemed content to explore at their own pace. They had dinner together once or twice a week, sometimes with Finn, and sometimes after he was in bed, with a sitter staying in the apartment. They had visited museums, walked along the waterfront, discovered favorite cafes and bookstores. But there had been no pressure, no expectations beyond friendship and mutual respect. Sloane opened the door to find Asher standing there, his tall frame slightly hunched against the drizzle, a bottle of wine in one hand and a small gift bag in the other. "Right on time," she said with a smile, stepping back to let him in. "Traffic was actually cooperative for once," he replied, shaking droplets of rain from his jacket as he hung it by the door. He looked different here in Seattle, more relaxed in his casual sweater and jeans than he had in the tailored suits of his previous position. The corporate executive was still there when needed, but this version of Asher, with slightly longer hair and laugh lines crinkling the corners of his eyes, seemed more authentic somehow. "What's in the bag?" Sloane asked, eyeing the colorful package curiously. "Something for the man of the house," Asher replied with a grin, heading toward Finn's room where the toddler was supposed to be napping, but was instead chattering happily to his stuffed animals. Sloane followed, leaning against the doorframe as Asher greeted her son. Finn's face lit up at the sight of his visitor, and he immediately scrambled to his feet, arms outstretched in welcome. "Ash!" he called, his pronunciation still developing. "You came!" "I did," Asher agreed seriously, as though Finn had made a profound observation. "And I brought you something." He held out the gift bag. With the unrestrained enthusiasm only toddlers possess, Finn tore into the package, revealing a set of wooden trains and tracks. "Twains!" he exclaimed, immediately sitting down to examine his treasure. "The salesperson assured me these are appropriate for his age," Asher told Sloane, as they watched Finn begin connecting track pieces with surprising dexterity, though she may have been overestimating his fine motor skills a bit. "Are you kidding? He's been practicing with those building blocks you got him last month. He's practically an engineer already," Sloane replied, warmth spreading through her chest at the easy affection between Asher and her son. It still amazed her sometimes, how naturally they had bonded, how Finn's face lit up whenever Asher arrived. "We'll let him play for a bit before dinner," she decided, leading the way back to the kitchen where a pot of pasta sauce was simmering on the stove. "I hope spaghetti is okay. It's been a busy week, and I didn't have time for anything fancy." "Spaghetti is perfect," Asher assured her, moving to open the wine he'd brought. "How are your students doing with the science project you mentioned?" As they prepared dinner together, Sloane found herself relaxing into the comfortable rhythm they'd established over the past months. Conversation flowed easily between updates on her classroom adventures and developments at Asher's company, punctuated by checking on Finn and stirring the sauce. It felt normal in a way her life with Griffin never had, a partnership of equals rather than a power dynamic designed to keep her small and dependent. Later, after Finn had been fed, bathed, and tucked into bed with a story, read by Asher at the toddler's insistent request, they settled on the living room couch with the remainder of the wine. "I got a letter today," Sloane said after a comfortable silence. "From Griffin." Asher's expression immediately sharpened with concern. "What did it say? Nothing threatening?" she hastened to assure him. "It came through his court-appointed therapist, who vetted it first. It was actually an apology of sorts." She took a sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. "He said the therapy is helping him recognize his controlling behaviors and the damage he caused. He acknowledged that our marriage was abusive and that he needs to take responsibility for his actions." "Do you believe him?" Asher asked carefully. Sloane considered the question. "I don't know. Part of me wants to, for Finn's sake. He is his father, after all. But another part remembers all the times Griffin apologized before, only to repeat the same behaviors days or even hours later." She sighed. "The therapist said Griffin's making progress, but that recovery from these patterns is a long-term process. He's not asking to see Finn yet, just wanted to let me know he's working on himself. How do you feel about that?" It was such an Asher question, focused on her feelings rather than telling her what to think or do. Cautiously optimistic, I guess, she admitted. Not for us. That chapter is completely closed. But for Finn's future relationship with his father. If Griffin can truly change. Asher nodded thoughtfully. That's a generous perspective, after everything he put you through. It's not really about forgiveness, Sloane clarified. It's about what's best for Finn in the long run. And it's also, she hesitated, then continued, it's also confirmation that I made the right choice in leaving. That I wasn't overreacting or being dramatic, as Griffin always claimed. His own therapist is confirming that the relationship was abusive. You never needed that validation, Asher said gently, but I understand why it matters to hear it. They fell silent again, the rain against the windows creating a cocoon of comfort around them. Sloane found herself studying Asher's profile in the soft lamplight, the strength in his jawline, the kindness in his eyes, the small scar near his temple that was the only remaining evidence of Griffin's attack. It struck her suddenly how much he had come to mean to her, not just as a friend and supporter, but as someone she genuinely cared for, deeply and personally. I've been thinking, she said, setting down her wine glass, about us. Iggy? Asher turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. What about us? You've never pushed for anything more than friendship, Sloane observed. Even though I sometimes wonder if you might want more. A flush of color touched Asher's cheeks. I've been trying to respect your space, your healing process. The last thing you needed was pressure from me. I know, Sloane acknowledged, and I've appreciated that more than I can say. But it's been almost a year since I left Griffin. 6 months since we moved here. I've had time to think, to process, figure out what I really want. And what do you want, Sloane? Asher asked, his voice quiet but intent. I want to stop being afraid of trusting again, she replied honestly. I want to believe that what happened with Griffin was about him, not about some fundamental flaw in me that attracts abusive relationships. She took a deep breath. I want to see if what I feel for you could grow into something more, if we gave it the chance. The vulnerability of the admission made her heart race. It had been so long since she had initiated anything in a relationship, since she had stated her own desires without fear of rejection or ridicule. Griffin had trained her to wait for his lead, to mirror his wants, rather than expressing her own. Asher reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted, and took her hand in his. I would like that very much, he said simply. I've cared about you for a long time, Sloane, but your friendship has been too important to risk by pushing for more before you were ready. And if I'm ready now? She asked, surprising herself with her boldness. In answer, Asher leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle, questioning touch that sent warmth cascading through her. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers for any sign of discomfort or regret. Okay? He asked. More than okay, Sloane confirmed, and this time she initiated the kiss, a silent affirmation of her trust in him, in herself, in the possibility of something healing and good between them. Later, as they said goodnight at the door, Asher still respectful of her boundaries, not assuming he would stay, Sloane felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. Not the giddy, consuming infatuation she had mistaken for love with Griffin, but something steadier and more grounded. A quiet joy built on friendship, mutual respect, and genuine caring. Dinner on Friday? Asher suggested. A real date this time. I'll arrange a sitter for Finn. I'd like that, Sloane agreed with a smile. After he left, she moved through the apartment, turning off lights and checking locks with the automatic vigilance that had become habit during her years with Griffin. But for the first time, the routine felt like simple caution rather than fear-driven necessity. She was safe here. Finn was safe, and they were building a life filled with possibility rather than constraint. In Finn's room, she paused to watch her son sleeping peacefully, his arms wrapped around the stuffed elephant that had been his constant companion since infancy. The wooden trains from Asher were carefully arranged on his nightstand, ready for play in the morning. The sight filled her with both fierce protectiveness and gentle hope. "We're going to be okay, little one," she whispered, echoing the promise she had made so many months ago, in the aftermath of that fateful party where a pair of thrown shoes had finally broken the spell of her unhappy marriage. More than okay. The following month brought a kaleidoscope of changes as Sloane and Asher navigated the transition from friendship to relationship. Their Friday dinner date had been followed by a Saturday afternoon at the Seattle Aquarium with Finn, then a Sunday morning walk along the waterfront with coffee and pastries. Each encounter had felt both familiar in its ease and new in its possibilities. They had agreed to move slowly, mindful of both Finn's attachment and Sloane's still healing emotional wounds. Asher never stayed overnight when Finn was home, and they were careful to frame their time together as friends around the toddler, though Finn's obvious adoration of Asher made Sloane suspect that a deeper connection wouldn't be unwelcome to her son. It was during this time that Sloane received another unexpected communication. Not from Griffin this time, but from the prison chaplain who had been working with him. "He's asking if he can write directly to Finn," Sloane told Asher as they prepared dinner together in her kitchen. A weeknight ritual that had evolved naturally over the weeks. Not now, but in the future, when Finn is old enough to understand letters. "How do you feel about that?" Asher asked, his now familiar question making her smile despite the seriousness of the topic. "Mixed," she admitted, chopping vegetables with methodical precision. "Part of me thinks it could be good for Finn to have some connection with his father, especially if Griffin is genuinely working on his issues. But another part worries about Griffin trying to manipulate Finn or saying inappropriate things about our past." Asher considered this as he stirred the risotto simmering on the stove. Could the therapist or chaplain continue to review the letters before they reach Finn? "That's what they're suggesting," Sloane nodded. "At least until they're confident Griffin won't attempt to use communication with Finn to get to me." "It seems like a reasonable safeguard," Asher observed, "and you'd always have the right to stop the letters if they became problematic." Sloane set down her knife, turning to face him directly. "You're remarkably understanding about all of this. Most men wouldn't be comfortable with their girlfriend maintaining any connection with an ex, let alone one who tried to assault them." Asher's lips quirked in a half-smile at her use of girlfriend, a term they hadn't explicitly used before. "Most men haven't seen firsthand how strong and capable you are, or how deeply you consider Finn's well-being in every decision you make." He shrugged. "Besides, I know this isn't about Griffin or giving him another chance. It's about Finn's right to know his father, in whatever limited, supervised way is safe." The simple understanding in his words brought unexpected tears to Sloane's eyes. She stepped forward, wrapping her arms around Asher's waist and resting her head against his chest. "Thank you," she murmured, "for seeing me, the real me." Asher's arms encircled her, one hand gently stroking her hair. "Always," he promised. The moment was interrupted by Finn's cheerful voice calling from the living room where he had been playing with his trains. "Mama! Ash! Look what I made!" They separated with reluctant smiles and went to admire the elaborate track configuration Finn had created, which he proudly demonstrated by sending a wooden train careening through its curves and loops. "That's amazing, buddy," Asher praised, kneeling down to examine the construction more closely. "How did you figure out how to make this turn here?" As Finn launched into an enthusiastic, if somewhat incoherent explanation, Sloane watched the two of them with a swelling heart. This was what family should feel like, she realized. Not walking on eggshells or performing for approval, but simply being seen and appreciated for exactly who you are. The weeks turned to months, and Seattle's rainy winter gave way to a glorious spring filled with cherry blossoms and renewed energy. Sloane's teaching career flourished as her innovative approaches gained recognition from colleagues and parents alike. Finn, now approaching his third birthday, was a bundle of curiosity and independence, his vocabulary expanding daily and his personality emerging as a delightful blend of Sloane's empathy and his own unique spark. And Asher. Asher had become the center of a life Sloane had never dared to imagine for herself. Their relationship deepened with each shared experience, each honest conversation, each challenge faced together rather than in opposition. He had gradually begun staying overnight when Finn was with a sitter, and more recently, with careful discussion and preparation, even when Finn was home. "Ash stays for breakfast," Finn had announced with delight the first morning he had padded into the kitchen to find Asher making pancakes, as though this development was the most natural thing in the world. It was on one such morning, almost exactly 1 year after their move to Seattle, that Asher made an unexpected proposal over pancakes and orange juice. "I've been thinking," he began, glancing nervously between Sloane and Finn. "My lease is up next month, and I spend most of my time here anyway." Sloane felt her heart quicken, both with anticipation and a small flicker of the old fear. Living together was a big step, one that would fundamentally change their dynamic and make disentanglement much more complicated if things went wrong. "Are you asking to move in with us?" she clarified, wanting to be certain they were on the same page. "Yes," Asher confirmed, "but only if you and Finn are completely comfortable with the idea. I know it's a big decision, and I don't want to rush anything." Finn, who had been listening with surprising attentiveness for a toddler, suddenly piped up, "Ash live here? With trains?" Asher laughed. "Yes, buddy. Me and all my trains would come live here." "Yes," Finn declared decisively, returning his attention to his pancakes as though the matter was settled. Sloane smiled at her son's simple certainty, wishing adult decisions could be so straightforward. "Can I think about it?" she asked Asher. "Not because I don't want it, but because I want to be sure I'm doing it for the right reasons." "Of course," Asher agreed immediately. "Take all the time you need." That evening, after Finn was asleep and Asher had gone back to his own apartment, Sloane sat on her balcony with a cup of tea, watching the lights of the city flicker against the darkening sky. She thought about how far she had come from that humiliating moment at the party, when Griffin had thrown her shoes out the window with cruel glee. She thought about the terrified woman who had spent the night in a guest house rather than face her husband's rage, the uncertain mother who had packed her child's things with trembling hands, the determined teacher who had reclaimed her career despite Griffin's attempts to sabotage her. Each of those versions of herself had led to this moment, this choice. Not a choice made from fear or necessity or lack of options, but a choice made from strength and clear-eyed assessment of what she truly wanted. And what she wanted, she realized with a clarity that took her breath away, was a life with Asher in it. Not as a rescuer or protector, but as a partner who saw her strength even when she doubted it herself, who respected her independence while offering genuine support, who loved her son with a devotion that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with heart. The next morning, she called Asher before leaving for work. "Yes," she said simply when he answered. "Yes," he repeated, confusion evident in his voice. "Yes, to you moving in," Sloane clarified, smiling into the phone. "Finn and I talked about it over breakfast, and we both agree that having you and your trains live with us would make us very happy." Asher's joyful laugh warmed her from within. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," she confirmed. "I've never been more sure of anything." 3 days later, as they began the process of merging Asher's belongings with hers, Sloane received one final letter from Griffin. It had been vetted by both the prison therapist and chaplain, who included notes confirming it contained nothing manipulative or inappropriate. "Sloane," Griffin had written in a hand steadier than she remembered, "I'm writing to tell you that I've decided to waive my rights to petition for visitation with Finn upon my release. Not because I don't care about him, but because I finally recognized through therapy that my presence in his life right now would be more about my needs than his. The chaplain tells me you've moved far away and started a new life. I'm glad. You deserve peace and happiness after what I put you through. I'm working every day to understand why I behaved as I did, and to ensure I never hurt anyone that way again. Maybe someday, when Finn is older and I've proven through years of changed behavior that I'm worthy of knowing him, we can revisit this decision. But for now, please know that I release you from any obligation to maintain contact with me. Take care of our son, and take care of yourself, Griffin." Sloane set down the letter, a complex mix of emotions washing through her. Relief, sadness for what might have been if Griffin had been a different kind of man. Hope that his apparent insights were genuine and lasting. She shared the letter with Asher that evening, after Finn was asleep. "Do you think he means it?" Asher asked, holding her close on the couch that would soon be theirs, rather than just hers. "I think he does, right now," Sloane replied thoughtfully. "Whether that commitment holds when he's released and faces the realities of life after prison, I don't know, but it feels like closure either way, like the final chapter of that part of my life has been written. And this," Asher gestured to the boxes half unpacked around them, to the framed photo of the three of them at the Space Needle that now sat on the mantel, to the evidence of their lives intertwining, "is the beginning of a new book entirely." "Not entirely new," Sloane corrected gently. "Finn and I bring our whole story with us, all the hard parts and the healing. You bring yours too. But yes," she smiled, leaning up to kiss him softly, "this is a new chapter, one I'm very much looking forward to writing together." As they sat there in the gentle quiet of the evening, Sloane thought about the long journey from that moment of public humiliation to this moment of private joy. She thought about the shoes Griffin had thrown so carelessly, never imagining that his cruel joke would set in motion the very freedom he had tried so hard to prevent. She thought about the Chinese proverb her grandmother had loved to quote, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." Her journey had begun with a single pair of shoes, flying through the air at a party. It had continued through fear and determination, setbacks and triumphs, grief for what was lost and hope for what might be. And now, here she was, strong, independent, loved not despite her strength, but because of it. A teacher again, a mother always, and now a woman allowing herself to love and be loved with honesty and respect. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would still be challenges ahead, navigating co-parenting if Griffin eventually sought contact with Finn, building a blended family with Asher, continuing her own healing journey. But for the first time, Sloane faced the future, without fear shadowing her every step. She had learned to trust herself again, to recognize her own worth, to set boundaries, and hold to them. "What are you thinking about?" Asher asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Sloane smiled, nestling closer into his embrace. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can ultimately lead us to the best ones, if we're brave enough to keep walking forward." "You're the bravest person I know," Asher said with simple certainty. And the beautiful thing was, after everything she had survived and overcome, Sloane finally believed him.